People like you never follow simple instructions. The words cut through the cabin air like a blade, sharp and sudden, freezing the crowded space into silence. The sound wasn't loud, yet it carried a chill that made the entire row go still. Every head turned toward the voice. Linda Parker, 41, Chief Flight Attendant of Regal Air Flight 771. Standing tall in the aisle, chin raised like a queen, ruling her aluminum kingdom. In front of her stood a man in a deep blue uniform, with silver insignia on his shoulders. Major Marcus Reed. Silent, composed, only slightly pausing as the words hit him. In a single instant, the once busy cabin fell dead quiet. The crying child stopped. The rolling suitcase halted mid-aisle. At 35,000 feet, among strangers suspended in the sky, an invisible line had been drawn, and Linda Parker had just planted her flag on one side of it. What she didn't know was that in that moment, she had ignited a storm no aircraft could ever fly through safely. Marcus stood still. There was no anger in his eyes, only a calm so deep it was impossible to read, a quiet that Linda, in her arrogance, mistook for fear. She didn't see his hand tighten, then release, as if restraining the blood that threatened to boil. To Linda, he was just another passenger, a weary man in uniform, someone she could scold, command, or belittle to feel her fragile power reaffirmed. But to the 217 other passengers, something invisible had cracked open in the air. The moment felt electric, like standing at the heart of a storm just before the lightning strikes. "Excuse me," Marcus said softly, his voice low and steady, carrying a weight that made the row shiver. He didn't respond with anger, but with the kind of control only those who had faced death could master. Linda let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "You heard me," she said, narrowing her eyes. "Now sit down, soldier, and don't make this harder than it needs to be." Under the cold light of the cabin, her hand rose. A quick, sharp, furious motion. Then came the crack, loud and clear, like thunder in a cloudless sky. Her palm left a vivid red mark across Marcus Reed's face. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. A flight attendant striking a serviceman in uniform in front of everyone. A slap that shattered both order and reason. Marcus didn't move. He turned his head slowly, his eyes cold as steel, as if studying the woman before him. Inside, he could hear his own heartbeat. 3 beats, then 4. Part of him wanted to react, to make her pay. But the other part, the one forged by discipline and years of service, said one word. "Wait." Linda stood frozen, her hand trembling, her face flushed, her pulse wild. She thought she had won. She thought he would bow his head or be escorted off the plane. She didn't realize that the man she had just humiliated, the one she believed to be just another tired passenger, was the very person who had the authority to ensure this flight would never take off. And in just 5 minutes, Linda Parker's world would fall faster than any plane she had ever served on. When the slap landed, Major Marcus Reed didn't react, didn't retaliate, didn't utter a single word. Only his gaze, calm to the point of being chilling, made Linda Parker instinctively step back half a pace. In that moment, he didn't just see the face of a flight attendant trembling with anger. He saw the deserts of Qatar again, where the wind carried sand like knives, and silence was the only way to survive. After 68 hours of travel, across 3 flights and 2 layovers, Marcus wanted nothing more than to return home to Seattle, where his 35-year-old wife, Eleanor, still texted him every morning. Jordan's team won today. He scored twice. His 10-year-old son still believed his father was a superhero, someone who could fly without wings. Marcus smiled as he read the message, then folded his phone away. It was the first real smile he'd managed in days. He had chosen seat 22B, not for comfort, but out of habit, in the middle of the crowd, least likely to be noticed. He wore a dark blue uniform, ironed to precision, each crease sharp. Hidden beneath the fabric of his left breast pocket was a small leather badge no one knew about, with 3 faintly engraved words: Federal Air Marshal. No one in the cabin realized that the man sitting quietly among them wasn't just a soldier. He was an air security operative, tasked with protecting the very people dozing peacefully around him from threats they didn't even want to believe existed. Marcus had flown hundreds of times, always in silence, always blending into the background, his eyes scanning every face, every movement, every piece of luggage. Not out of suspicion, but instinct, a reflex forged by discipline, memory, and invisible scars. He had been trained to read people in seconds, who was nervous, who was hiding something, who might pose a danger. But today, when his gaze settled on Linda Parker, what he saw wasn't danger. It was exhaustion. A woman at war with herself, clinging to authority through her voice, hiding cracks behind lipstick and a forced smile. He knew that type. He had seen it on the battlefield. People who'd lived too long in chaos and couldn't bear peace when it came. They needed to control something, anything, just to feel alive. Marcus inhaled deeply, taking in the familiar cabin air, the faint blend of plastic, metal, and human breath. He leaned back, eyes half closed, but his mind continued to sweep through the cabin. A businessman murmured into his phone. A child whimpered on and off in the back row. A young family struggled with a baby seat. Everything seemed normal, except for one thing: the energy radiating from the woman in the blue uniform walking the aisle. It was taut, sharp, and heavy, like a wire stretched to its breaking point. Linda spoke to passengers with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Every word, every gesture carried strain. Whenever someone failed to comply immediately, her lips tightened. Her eyes flashed with irritation. Marcus tilted his head slightly. A small sign, but unmistakable to him: loss of emotional control. In Air Marshal training, that was considered the second most dangerous element on a flight, just after firearms. Because a person who couldn't control themselves would, sooner or later, explode and take everyone with them. He closed his eyes, his body perfectly still, betraying nothing. But in his mind, his internal assessment had already begun. Observation level elevated. Behavioral tension increasing. His muscles remained relaxed, but his instincts had switched on. An old, familiar alert, like a distant siren echoing across the desert. He had no idea that in just 10 minutes, that same woman, Linda Parker, would become the only real threat aboard this flight. Nor did he know that in one fleeting moment, he would have to pull out the badge he'd kept hidden for years, the badge powerful enough to stop a plane before it ever left the ground. That morning, Linda Parker looked into the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes were ringed with sleepless shadows, the fine lines around her mouth hidden beneath a thin layer of makeup. She straightened her uniform collar, adjusted the blue scarf around her neck, then forced a smile, one that never reached her eyes. Inside her head, noise clashed and overlapped. The chime of a credit card overdue notice, the voice of her ex, husband's lawyer on the voicemail, and the ticking clock jumping to the 47th minute, 20 minutes later than planned. When she was young, Linda had thought being a flight attendant was a dream. Traveling the world, meeting accomplished people, carrying herself with elegance and authority. But after 15 years, she realized she was just drifting endlessly through the sky, with no place left to land in her own life. Everything was collapsing. Her marriage, her career, and worst of all, her self-respect. That morning, the email reading "Promotion request denied for the 4th time" was the final straw. The person chosen instead was Sophie Ramos, a bright 25-year-old attendant who was always smiling, always knowing just how to make passengers adore her. Linda had smiled politely when she heard the news, but inside, a deep crack had begun to spread. When she entered the pre-flight briefing room, she sat silently at the end of the table. The crew leader said something about bad weather near Denver, and that there would be an in-flight performance review for Sophie. Linda didn't hear a word. In her mind, one thought repeated over and over. Her again. Always her. When the meeting ended, she put on her professional smile, though beneath the lipstick her teeth were clenched tight. Outside, the sky was dull and heavy, thick with clouds that promised a rough flight ahead. And perhaps not just for the weather. From the moment boarding began, Linda was stretched thin as wire. Passengers complained. Babies cried. The cabin door was delayed by 15 minutes, and luggage cluttered the aisles. Every small inconvenience added fuel to the fire already burning inside her. When a young man tried to shove his guitar into the overhead bin, she snapped instantly. "Sir, this isn't a moving truck. If it doesn't fit, it's getting checked." The man blushed and muttered an apology. Linda turned away, but even that didn't feel like enough. Then an elderly woman struggled to pull her suitcase down the aisle. Linda folded her arms and said coldly, "Ma'am, we're on a schedule. Please move faster." Passengers nearby exchanged glances, a few lowering their heads. They didn't know what battles she was fighting. They only saw a woman drained of patience, sharp, tongued, and stripped of warmth. When the final cabin door closed, Linda stood in the aisle and exhaled deeply. In that fleeting moment, she felt something, a strange sense of power. Here, inside this sealed aluminum tube, she was the law. She could order a businessman to put away his laptop, command a politician to fasten his seatbelt, or tell a movie star to stay seated during turbulence. On the ground, she was just another forgotten woman. But at 35,000 feet, she was queen. And today, that queen was looking for someone to prove her power still existed. What she didn't know was that only a few rows behind her, fate had already chosen that someone, Major Marcus Reed, the one man on this flight who could bring down her fragile kingdom in just 5 minutes. A baby's cry shattered the crowded cabin. sharp as glass breaking in a tense room. Ethan Morgan, 30. 3. Tried to soothe his 8-month-old daughter while balancing a bulky car seat in his other hand. Beside him, Claire, 30-1, frantically searched through a massive canvas bag for the baby's bottle. They had waited 3 hours at the gate, exhausted, hungry, just desperate to sit down. But when they looked up at the overhead bin above row 24, both froze. It was full. "I don't think there's any space left," Claire said, her voice trembling with stress. "Try rearranging it," Ethan sighed, pushing the bag into a narrow gap between 2 suitcases. The bag stuck fast, refusing to move. He turned toward the man behind them, Major Marcus Reed, who sat quietly, observing with a calm, understanding gaze. Then, from the front of the cabin, came a voice sharp as scraping metal. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" Linda Parker approached, her heels striking the floor in brisk, echoing clicks. Her eyes swept over the diaper bag, as if it were a crime scene. "The overhead bins are full," she said coldly. "If your bag doesn't fit, it must be checked. We're not holding the flight for this." "Please," Claire said softly, her voice cracking. "It's our baby's diaper bag. It has formula and wipes and—" Linda cut her off. "You should have planned better. Maybe next time, board earlier." A few passengers turned their heads, watching. Everyone could hear it, the tone dripping with disdain, devoid of compassion. Claire looked down, her eyes filling with tears. Ethan tightened his hold on his daughter, struggling to stay calm. "We were told to wait for the car seat inspection," he said evenly. "We didn't want to break the rules." "Then follow them now," Linda snapped, crossing her arms. "Either the bag goes under your seat, or it gets checked." Baby Lily began to wail, her cries rising above the hum of the air vents. Ethan tried to soothe her, while Claire looked ready to cry herself. Marcus watched the scene, his chest heavy. He'd seen this kind of exhaustion before, in refugee camps, in base hospitals, in people who only needed a small act of kindness to breathe again. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Maybe I can help." Linda spun around, her eyes flashing. "Sir, please remain seated until boarding is complete." Marcus's tone remained calm. "I've done this before. Think of it as Tetris with luggage." He lifted his hands and moved with precision, turning a suitcase sideways, easing the corner of the diaper bag into a narrow space and sliding it diagonally until it fit perfectly. A soft click followed as the compartment closed, secure and snug. The row collectively exhaled. Ethan smiled weakly. "Man, thank you. You just saved us." Claire could barely whisper, "Thank you, sir," before turning to comfort her baby. Marcus nodded with a gentle smile, tapping the latch one more time to be sure it held. He was about to sit down when he noticed Linda standing still, eyes narrowed, lips pressed tight. She didn't thank him. She didn't smile. She only stared, as if he had trespassed on her domain. Inside Linda, a familiar feeling stirred, that creeping sense of threat. In front of all these people, a passenger, and worse, a black man, had made her look weak, incompetent. She felt her last shred of power, the only thing she still clung to, stolen right out from under her, in her own cabin. Marcus bowed his head politely, about to take his seat. but Linda's cold glare froze the air around them. She leaned close, her voice low, words hissing through clenched teeth. "When I'm handling a passenger, Sergeant, you don't get to interfere. You sit down, you stay quiet, and you let me do my job." Marcus lifted his gaze, his calm terrifying in its stillness. "Ma'am," he said, voice deep and steady, like wind through steel. "I was just trying to help. We all want to get home safe." To anyone else, it was a harmless statement. But to Linda Parker, trembling between pride and fear, it was defiance. A spark landing in a pile of dry powder she'd been collecting all day. She didn't know that in just a few minutes, when her anger finally exploded, she wouldn't just shatter a moment in the cabin. She would burn down her entire career with it. The air thickened. Every sound vanished, leaving only the pounding of Linda Parker's heart in her chest. She could hear the rush of blood in her ears, the slow shuffle of shoes on the aisle, the faint metallic hum vibrating beneath the plane's floor. All of it blended into a suffocating rhythm of anger ready to erupt. Major Marcus Reed stood still, tall and silent, his calmness almost unreal. He didn't react, didn't justify himself, didn't show fear. That composure, that silence, made Linda feel challenged. To her, his restraint wasn't control, it was condescension. "Sit down," she hissed, her voice low but sharp enough for the entire row to hear. "You're holding up the entire boarding process." Marcus gave a slight nod. "Understood, ma'am. The bag's secure. No safety issue now." The phrase, "no safety issue," hit her like an insult. She, the one responsible for the safety of this flight, was being lectured by a passenger, by a man like him, a tired, dark-skinned soldier in an economy seat. Her anger boiled up. "You don't get to decide what's safe on my aircraft," she snapped, each word cutting through the air. "When I give an instruction, it's to be followed immediately and without question. Are we clear?" The passengers around them froze. A few exchanged uneasy glances. Claire Morgan lowered her head and clutched her baby tighter. Ethan gripped his wife's hand. Arthur Lee, a lawyer sitting beside Marcus, narrowed his eyes and discreetly raised his phone to record. Marcus kept his voice calm. "Ma'am, I respect your job, but this situation's resolved. We can all continue boarding." Those words, gentle as a breeze, were the final spark. Linda leaned in close, her breath carrying the scent of coffee and mint, her eyes wild, wounded, cornered. "People like you never follow simple instructions," she said, loud and clear, every word burning with venom. The cabin trembled with silence. 217 passengers froze, a wave of disbelief washing over them. That phrase, "your kind," hung in the air like poisonous smoke, making everyone hold their breath. Ethan turned back. Claire covered her baby's ears. Arthur raised his phone higher, eyes wide. Marcus stood motionless. His skin, tanned from long days in the desert, now burned hot. He had heard those words before, in training camps, in bars, in places where people should have known to respect the uniform he wore. But this time, in the middle of the sky, wearing that very uniform, before hundreds of witnesses, those words struck him like a bullet straight to the heart. He took a deep breath, lips pressed together. Don't react. Not out of fear, but because he knew one wrong move could turn everything upside down. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice so calm it chilled the air. That was entirely uncalled for. Linda narrowed her eyes. "Excuse me?" "I suggest you walk away and check your attitude," he replied, his voice low and steady, carrying an authority no passenger should have possessed. The words hit like a spark in a pool of gasoline. Linda jerked back, her face flushing crimson. The world blurred. She heard nothing, saw nothing, except him. That upright stance, that calm, unshakable gaze. Then, crack, her hand struck his face, the sharp sound ripping through the silence. A child screamed. Gasps echoed down the aisle. For the 200 people watching, time froze on one image. A pale hand imprinted across the sun, darkened cheek of an Air Force officer. Linda stood there, breathing hard, her hand trembling as if she herself couldn't believe what she had done. But then, in that half second, a twisted rush of triumph flooded through her. She thought, now he'll be thrown off this plane. He'll bow his head. He'll remember who's in charge here. But Marcus didn't bow. Slowly, he turned back to face her. In his eyes, there was no rage, only a cold, disciplined authority. The gaze of someone assessing a threat not through emotion, but through duty. Linda swallowed hard, her pulse racing. Some instinct deep inside whispered that she had just crossed the wrong line. The cabin remained frozen in silence. No one knew that the man she had just struck, the one they assumed was only a weary serviceman, was in fact a federal agent with absolute authority in the skies of the United States. And in just a few minutes, Linda Parker would learn what it truly meant to lose all power, right here in her own domain. No one said a word. The sound of the slap still echoed in everyone's mind, like the aftershock of lightning on a clear day. Linda Parker stood frozen, her hand trembling slightly, breath uneven, while Major Marcus Reed, the man she had just struck, stood perfectly still, motionless. But his silence wasn't weakness. It was the kind of stillness born of discipline, the calm of a volcano forced into control. The cabin light reflected against his cheek, where the red imprint of her hand still burned vividly. One side of his face stung with heat, yet his eyes remained cold, unwavering. Every instinct in him, honed through years of battlefields, covert missions, and dangerous flights, activated at once. He no longer saw a flight attendant. He saw a threat inside a sealed aircraft. "Ma'am," he said slowly, each word heavy as steel, "you just crossed a line." Linda let out a sharp, shaky laugh, half defiance, half fear. "Oh, please. You were out of line the moment you stood up. Now sit down before I have you removed." Marcus didn't respond. He simply turned his head, scanning the faces around him. Shocked passengers, frozen expressions, phones raised discreetly. The cabin was breathless. A few whispers broke through. "Did she just hit him?" "Oh my God." She actually did. Marcus inhaled deeply, then unbuckled his seatbelt. His movements were slow, deliberate, perfectly controlled. Every gesture, the way he rose, the slight tug of his jacket, made Linda instinctively step back. His power didn't come from C's or rank, but from a deadly kind of composure. "Sir, sit down immediately," Linda shouted, her voice cracking, louder than she intended. But Marcus had already turned, his gaze no longer that of a passenger, but of a commander. His voice was low, steady, absolute. "Miss, I'm requesting immediate access to the cockpit. We have a developing security situation." The cabin erupted in whispers. Passengers exchanged bewildered looks. From the front, a young flight attendant, Sophie Ramos, hurried down the aisle, concern in her voice. "Rebecca," she called softly. "Is everything okay?" Linda snapped, "Stay out of this, Sophie." Her voice trembled. For the first time, Sophie saw something she had never seen before in her superior's eyes. Fear. Marcus's eyes didn't leave Linda. "Please inform the captain I need to speak with him immediately." Linda scoffed. "You need to speak with the captain? Who do you think you are?" His reply was calm, precise, every syllable cutting like a blade. "Major Marcus Reed, Federal Air Marshal, United States Air Force." The air froze. Each word landed slow, heavy, undeniable. The entire cabin fell silent. Phones lowered, mouths closed. Linda's face turned pale. In her mind, a fragment from old training flashed, a line she had once ignored. If there's ever an air marshal on board, they outrank every crew member in a security situation. You obey without question. She swallowed hard. "You're bluffing," she whispered, her voice cracking. "There's no way." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a black leather wallet, opening it to reveal a silver badge glinting under the cabin lights. The words Department of Homeland Security, Federal Air Marshal Service shone clearly. Linda stumbled back, her heartbeat loud and erratic. The floor beneath her seemed to tilt. Her tiny kingdom was collapsing. He said nothing more, only nodded to Sophie. "Get the captain, now!" Sophie nodded quickly and nearly ran toward the cockpit. Passengers began whispering, cameras flashing, some even starting live streams. From the back, Ethan murmured, "He's an air marshal." Claire gripped his hand, trembling. She hit a federal officer. Linda stood frozen, her eyes darting, breathing fast. Every insult, every word, every action of the past 10 minutes now replayed like a damning list of charges. When Sophie returned with First Officer Adam Price, the young pilot's face tightened as he took in the scene. A stunned flight attendant, a federal officer with a red mark on his cheek, and 200 passengers filming. Marcus met his eyes, his voice low and firm. "We have a crew member who is emotionally unstable, has assaulted a federal officer, and now poses a direct threat to flight safety." Adam swallowed hard. "Captain needs to hear this himself," he said quietly. "Then take me to him," Marcus replied. As he stepped forward, the cabin fell utterly silent, so still they could all hear the pounding of Linda's heart. She knew it then. Every ounce of power, every illusion of control she had built, had just vanished into thin air. The plane hadn't even left the ground, but Linda Parker's career had already fallen from the sky. The cockpit door closed behind them, shutting out the noise of the cabin. Inside, the soft glow from the control panel reflected off the face of Captain Richard Donovan, 50, 3 years old, his eyes seasoned by thousands of hours in the air, now fixed on the red mark glowing on Major Marcus Reed's cheek. "Good God," he murmured. "What in heaven's name happened back there?" Marcus stood at attention, his voice steady, each word crisp and deliberate. "Captain, my name is Major Marcus Reed, Federal Air Marshal, United States Air Force. I'm reporting an active security breach involving a member of your cabin crew." There was no anger in his tone, only discipline. He recounted everything, calmly, precisely, leaving nothing out. How Linda Parker had insulted passengers, used racial language, slapped him, and lost complete control while in uniform and representing the airline. The air in the cockpit grew heavy. First Officer Adam Price, younger and standing beside Marcus, stared down through the window toward the tarmac, trying to process what he had just heard. He knew exactly what it meant. This wasn't merely a crew member's misconduct. It was an assault on a federal officer in the line of duty. Captain Donovan leaned back in his seat, silent for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice dropped low, steady but weary. "You're saying she assaulted you, on duty, inside a federal aircraft?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied firmly. "Unprovoked, and in front of 217 witnesses." The captain's jaw tightened. He took a deep breath, adjusting the brim of his cap. He had seen almost every kind of crisis in the air. Engine fires, violent passengers, sudden depressurization. But never this. A flight attendant attacking a federal air marshal? At altitude, that would qualify as a Level 1 emergency. "Adam," he turned to his first officer. "What's the status in the cabin?" "Sir," Price replied, "the passengers know something serious happened. Many recorded the incident. Miss Parker is still in the main aisle. The younger attendant, Sophie, is trying to move her to the back galley." Donovan nodded slowly. "All right. Here's what we're going to do." He pressed the intercom. "Regal Operations, this is Flight 771 at Gate C42. We have a crew issue escalating to a federal matter. Request immediate ground security and law enforcement at the gate. Possible assault on a federal officer." Static crackled before the dispatcher's voice replied, "Copy that, Captain. Security and airport police are en route. Please confirm. Crew assault." "Affirmative," Donovan said, his gaze locked on Marcus. "Situation contained. Aircraft grounded." He set the radio down and turned to the air marshal. "Major Reed, as pilot in command, I'm formally deferring cabin security to you until law enforcement boards this aircraft. You have authority to take whatever measures are necessary." Marcus nodded. "Understood, Captain. My priority is to maintain passenger safety and ensure she's isolated." "Good," Donovan said. "Price, escort her to the aft galley. Make sure she stays there. I don't want her near the passengers again." "Roger that," Price replied, stepping out. When the cockpit door opened, the muffled sounds of murmurs and uneasy breathing from 217 people filled the air again. Linda was standing near row 21, her back pressed to a seat, her face pale as she saw Price approaching with Sophie beside him. "Ms. Parker," Price said firmly. "Captain's orders. Please follow me to the aft galley." Linda's eyes hardened. "On what grounds?" "On grounds of safety and federal directive," Price answered, his tone sharp. "You've been relieved of duty pending investigation." The cabin lights caught her face, makeup smudged. lips trembling, her hand clutching a wrinkled handkerchief like a final weapon. But under the stares of hundreds, there was nowhere left to hide. At the front of the cabin, Marcus stepped out of the cockpit, his voice calm but commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We'll be returning to the gate due to a crew-related issue. Everything is under control." Every passenger turned to look at him, no longer seeing a tired traveler, but a leader standing steady in chaos. Linda swallowed hard, frozen in place. As the two pilots approached her, she whispered under her breath, "This can't be happening." But it was. And outside the window, the Atlanta sunset burned red like a warning flare. The plane had never even left the ground, yet Linda Parker's fate had already been sealed, waiting only to fall. The plane's wheels met the jet bridge with a soft clunk, followed by the hiss of the connector locking into place. Flight 771 had returned to the ground. But inside the cabin, no one moved. The air felt thick, as if everyone were holding the same uneasy breath. At the back of the aircraft, Linda Parker sat slumped against the galley wall, her hands clasped so tightly that her nails had pierced her palms, tiny spots of blood marking the skin. She stared at the stainless steel door in front of her, where her own reflection stared back, smudged makeup, mascara streaked down her cheeks, dry, cracked lips, and eyes filled with a fear she barely recognized. Every word she had said, every gesture, every sharp syllable of contempt echoed in her mind, weaving together into a merciless indictment. From the front of the plane, the captain's voice came over the intercom, deep, steady, and cold as a verdict. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a crew-related security incident, we will be unable to depart. We're returning to the gate. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The moment the words "security incident" echoed through the cabin, a wave of murmurs broke out. Everyone knew that incident had a name: Linda Parker. She sat frozen, a chill of sweat trickling down her back. She could feel the eyes on her, even though no one said a word. Some passengers looked away, unwilling to meet her gaze, while others lifted their phones discreetly, recording, texting, posting updates to social media. "Flight attendant slapped passenger. Turns out he's a federal agent. Whole flight grounded. It's insane." In row 22, attorney Arthur Lee replayed the video he had just recorded. The image was crystal clear. Linda's words, the slap, Marcus's composed response. He saved the file, uploading it to the cloud. The evidence was airtight. Marcus sat quietly, his gaze fixed on the window, where airport police vehicles now waited by the jet bridge. He felt no satisfaction, no anger, only the calm of someone who had long understood consequences. Beside him, Sophie Ramos leaned close and whispered, "Sir, the captain said law enforcement is on their way." Marcus nodded once. "Good. Let's keep things calm until they arrive." Then came the sound of footsteps, firm, heavy, deliberate. The cabin door opened. 3 figures entered, a regal air supervisor in a navy blazer, her name tag reading Diane Hernandez, and 2 airport security officers in black uniforms. Instantly, the cabin fell silent. The trio moved down the aisle, the overhead lights glinting off the silver badges on the officers' chests. As they reached row 20 teats 2, Marcus gave a subtle nod. No words were needed. His look alone said, "She's at the back." They continued forward. Linda heard the footsteps approaching, her heartbeat pounding painfully in her chest. No, she thought. Not like this. Not in front of everyone. "Ms. Parker?" The supervisor's voice was calm but carried a weight that allowed no argument. Linda looked up. "Yes?" "Please stand. You'll need to come with us." I'm still on duty." "The passengers." "Your duties have been suspended," Diane interrupted, her voice cool and steady. "Effective immediately." The two officers stood beside her. One extended a hand, not to hold hers, but as a silent order. Linda rose slowly, her legs numb. She tried to breathe, to compose herself, but tears were already pooling in her eyes. Each step she took echoed down the aisle. Click, click, click. Slow and steady, heavy as if dragging invisible chains. The passengers watched in silence. A woman whispered, "She hit him. I saw it." The man beside her replied softly, "He's an air marshal." The entire world seemed to narrow into one small corridor between two rows of seats. Ahead, Marcus stood tall near the front of the plane, his posture straight, his expression calm, not mocking, not vengeful, but steady and resolute, the look of a man simply doing his duty. That calm made Linda feel smaller than she ever had before. As she walked past him, a single pair of hands began to clap, then another, and another. The sound spread, uneven, hesitant, but unstoppable. It wasn't applause for joy. It was release, a collective exhale from those who had held their breath too long. Linda Parker lowered her head, tears slipping down her cheeks, her hands gripping the strap of her purse. Each step forward cut deeper into the fragile pride she once mistook for power. The cabin door shut behind her with a dull thud. In that instant, Linda realized the applause outside wasn't for justice, not for her, not even for Marcus Reed. It was a farewell to the career she had once built her entire identity around. Outside the window, the Atlanta sunset burned a deep crimson, fire bleeding across the horizon. A chapter had closed, and for Linda Parker, there would be no more flights from here. 3 weeks later, on an autumn morning in Seattle, a light rain draped the gray streets like a thin veil. In a small apartment overlooking the harbor, Major Marcus Reed sat at a wooden table, a cup of coffee cooling slowly between his hands. The soft morning light reflected off a framed medal on the wall, the Medal of Professional Valor, awarded for composure and dignity in a high-tension aviation security situation. But Marcus wasn't looking at it. His gaze was on the window, where his wife Eleanor was watering the small pots of flowers along the balcony. She still had the habit of smiling whenever she saw him sitting there, quiet, as if listening to the echoes of a past that had not yet faded. Eleanor stepped inside and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's over now, Marcus." He nodded slowly. "For them, maybe, but not for her." Since the day the flight made headlines, Linda Parker's name had disappeared within 48 hours. The airline had terminated her. The media moved on to the next story, and the world kept turning. But for Marcus, the story hadn't ended at the airport. He remembered standing in the interrogation room that day, surrounded by agents, executives, and airline representatives. They had asked him to sign the official report and whether he wanted to press charges. Marcus had glanced down at the faint redden mark still visible on his cheek and answered simply, "No charges. Let her go." The room fell silent. Someone asked, "Why, Major?" Marcus replied, "Because if I wanted punishment, I would have raised my hand on that plane. I didn't. That's not what strength is." He said nothing more, but deep down, he knew that justice was not always about retribution. Sometimes the greatest strength lies in breaking the cycle of hate. Afterward, he received hundreds of messages and letters from strangers, veterans, flight attendants, passengers, people who had been humiliated but couldn't fight back. "You showed us dignity," one wrote. "You made silence look powerful." Marcus read each line carefully, then closed his laptop. He didn't see himself as a hero. He simply saw a man who had done what needed to be done. To control, not to retaliate. A week later, Regal Air held a public press conference. The CEO bowed her head before cameras, offering a formal apology. The video went viral, drawing millions of views. But Marcus never watched it. The only message he received came from a familiar voice, Sophie Ramos, the young flight attendant. "Sir," she said, her voice trembling, "I just wanted to say thank you. You changed how I see this job. You made me believe respect still matters." Marcus smiled softly, his tone warm and steady. "Then make sure you never forget that. Every flight, every passenger, you carry that belief." After hanging up, his eyes lingered on a photo sitting on the table, him in uniform, standing beside Elena and their son, Jordan. Both were smiling, their joy so bright it made every scar seem smaller. Jordan had asked him once, during the ceremony where he was honored, "Dad, how did you stay calm when she hit you?" Marcus had crouched down, ruffled his son's hair, and replied simply, "Because real strength isn't about fighting back, son. It's about knowing when not to." Outside, the Seattle sky continued to drizzle, the wind whispering softly through the window frame, carrying with it the scent of salt from the bay and the first chill of the season. Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep, quiet breath. No smell of jet fuel, no roar of engines, no alarms. Only peace, true and unbroken. His story didn't end with victory, but with the silence of dignity. And somewhere far away, in a small town, a woman named Linda Parker was waking to a different world, one without skies, without a flight badge, only the weight of consequence and the faint possibility of redemption. What she didn't yet know was that fate still owed her one final meeting. 2 years later, on a May afternoon, the Seattle sun poured soft gold across the glass windows of a small diner at the end of Harbor Lane. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the gentle hiss of a frying pan and the quiet clinking of dishes. The rhythm of an ordinary, peaceful day. Major Marcus Reed stepped inside, removing his faded cap. He had just finished a training session at the nearby naval base. Every time he returned to the city, he stopped by this little diner, the one that served the chicken sandwich he and his son both loved. But today, something was different. His footsteps faltered as the waitress turned to greet him. The woman looked about 43, her hair tied neatly back, her face pale from sleepless nights. She wore an old apron and held a coffee pot in her trembling hand. When their eyes met, the world seemed to freeze. Linda Parker. No introductions were needed. They recognized each other instantly. For a brief moment, time folded into a single heartbeat. The slap, the stare, the silence, and everything that had changed since that day. Linda froze, the coffee pot tilting slightly, a few drops spilling onto the floor. "Major Reed," she whispered, her voice hoarse. I didn't think I'd ever see you again." Marcus smiled faintly, setting his cap on the table. "Life's strange that way, isn't it?" She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I lost everything," Linda said softly, her hand shaking as she poured him coffee. "My home, my job, my friends. I had to start over from nothing. I work here 6 days a week. No one even remembers my name anymore, and maybe that's the punishment I deserve." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. His face showed no anger, only the calm of someone who had long made peace with the past. His voice was low and steady, like wind moving through steel. "You didn't need the world to punish you, Linda. You've been punishing yourself every day since that flight." Linda bit her lip, tears slipping down and staining the worn fabric of her apron. "I deserved it. What I did was unforgivable." Marcus set his cup down and lifted his gaze to meet hers. Unforgivable, maybe, but not unredeemable. She froze, the words catching in her chest. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked. "About me?" Marcus gave a small smile. "Not as often as you think, but when I do, I remember it as the day I learned that silence can protect more people than anger ever could." Linda let out a quiet laugh through her tears. "You're still teaching lessons, huh?" "Only the ones life insists on repeating," he replied, his tone warm, almost kind. She opened her mouth as if to say more, but he stood, taking his wallet from his pocket. "Keep the change," he said, then paused. "And Linda." She looked up, heart pounding. "We don't get to choose the consequences of our actions," he said softly, "but we do get to choose who we become after them." Linda stood still, her breath trembling. The entire diner had gone silent. The wind outside brushed against the curtains, sunlight falling gently across her face, a face that once carried pride and defiance, now stripped down to something honest, fragile, and painfully human. As Marcus stepped out into the sunlight, the golden light spilled across the street. Linda watched him leave, still holding the coffee pot, her chest tightening with a feeling that was both loss and release. It wasn't his forgiveness that made her cry, but the chance he gave her to forgive herself. Outside, Marcus put his cap back on and walked slowly down the tree-lined street. He glanced up at the sky, the same sky that 2 years earlier had witnessed a storm of arrogance and prejudice. Now it was calm, clear, cloudless. And he understood justice doesn't always land with sirens or verdicts. Sometimes it lands in a cup of coffee, a shared glance, and the quiet grace of forgiveness. The story of Marcus Reed didn't end with a slap or with applause, but with that small, still moment where one lost soul found her way again, and another chose compassion over resentment. High above, another flight ascended into the blue, carrying strangers to faraway places, and perhaps among them, someone else was learning how to be kind, even when no one was watching. The story of Marcus Reed and Linda Parker is not just about a slap. a mistake, or an incident that shook social media. It is a mirror reflecting a world where people can lose everything simply because they forget how to look at one another with respect. Marcus never needed to prove his power. He taught the world a lesson more profound than any badge could represent. That dignity does not need to shout to be seen. And Linda, who once believed that power came from position and uniform, ultimately learned the truest lesson only after losing both. In life, we all face moments when anger wants to take the lead, when pride tries to speak louder than reason. But if we can pause, take a breath, and choose kindness instead, we might save more than one person, sometimes even ourselves. If you believe that true strength does not lie in striking back, but in how we remain calm when we are hurt, leave a like for this story and subscribe to join us in sharing more journeys of dignity, awakening, and the belief that people can still choose what's right, even in their most misguided moments. Because sometimes it is the silence of compassion that echoes the loudest across the sky.